I don't really have nostalgia for the series since I've only played through Silent Hill 1 to 3 recently on stream. But before that, the only thing I really knew about Silent Hill was the fact that it had fog, scary nurses, and Pyramid Head. Though the visuals, themes, and ambience have always been interesting to me, even when I was much younger. Especially since the game always popped up every time I'd see articles and videos discussing the best horror games of all time. It fascinated me that it was one of the games that people would keep talking about even 20 years after its release. When I finally got into Silent Hill 2, I became a little obsessed with it, especially after I finished my first playthrough. Like, I ended up watching the making of Silent Hill 2, and I listened to the soundtrack while looking up all the lore about the characters and enemies. I'd even put some random analysis videos when I'd be busy doing chores or going to bed. It doesn't help that YouTube knew that I was just consuming so much Silent Hill content that they started recommending more of it to me. Now, when I watched the first few teasers for Silent Hill 2 Remake, I didn't like how it looked. I thought that the gameplay looked awful, and the characters did not look good at all. It kind of felt like I was watching a trailer for a janky horror indie game instead of a remake of a classic title. But after seeing the next few trailers that showed more of the game, I started to think the impossible. I thought, wait, this remake actually looks good? And the more I rewatched them, the more my previous criticisms about everything started to fade away. When I finally played the game myself, I was completely blown away. I know I mentioned that I got a little obsessed with OG Silent Hill 2 earlier, but the remake brought that feeling back, and it became so much stronger. Like, seriously, Silent Hill 2 Remake literally became my obsession for a week. I'm sure that those of you who dropped by my streams for the game knew that. I loved it so much that I ended up playing through it twice to try to get the other endings. Now, do I think it's a perfect remake? No, but it gets really close to it. Silent Hill 2 is about James Sunderland, a man who goes to the foggy town of Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his wife Mary. She claims that she's waiting for him in their special place. The thing is, Mary died of a disease 3 years ago, but James decides to go there anyway, hoping to find her. I've always thought that the opening cutscene of the original game was perfect, but the remake somehow elevated it. It recreated the intro while adding little things that enhanced the whole sequence, like when James was shaking and looking at his hands, and even subtle changes like the new camera angles. All of that enhanced the intro, and I practically got goosebumps when I watched everything for the first time. Changes like this extend to other parts of the game as well, since certain scenes don't exactly play out the same way. The remake kinda does its own thing from time to time, like the characters you meet in specific locations in the original game ended up being in different areas. I thought that the changes were great though, especially since the remake tried to keep the core of what Silent Hill 2 was, but I'd say it's understandable if some people might not end up liking it. There were certain points where I was disappointed though, specifically when I was waiting for the iconic pizza scene to appear. The only thing that the remake did was make a reference. It made me laugh at the time, sure, but I was still hoping for the scene to pop up later in the game. The new scene that replaced it ended up being pretty good though, and just like the other things that they added in the remake, it felt like I could experience Silent Hill 2 in a slightly different way. I think that this is very true for other people who've played the original games as well. As for newcomers to the game, you can go back and enjoy the OG since it's a slightly different experience. Though if you're not used to older games, it might be a little challenging because of how different the gameplay is. I'm personally a fan of the fixed camera angles in the original, since it gives a certain level of charm and immersion, just like other old-school survival horror games. But the remake's third-person perspective is immersive in its own way. Like, it lets you look at all the things that you previously couldn't see, due to the limited camera angles of the original game. I thought it was really cool since it made the town feel both familiar and new. It also helps that many locations in the original game have been expanded, thanks to modern technology. It made exploration so much better, even when I was getting lost in both the normal and otherworld locations. I actually started a third playthrough of the game just to record some footage for this video, and I realized that I never actually discovered all the places that you can go to in town. It surprised me since I was sure that I broke every window that allowed me to get into those shops. I even missed out on some unlocked doors. But I guess that's the best thing about the game. You gotta search every nook and cranny to find everything that it has to offer. Another thing that made exploration great was that the game's visually stunning. In fact, it was so visually stunning that the game crashed multiple times on my PC throughout my 2 playthroughs, but I'll talk more about that later. I absolutely loved how much detail the devs placed in the environments. Every space, whether it was a room, alleyway, or someone's backyard, felt lived in. It felt incredibly immersive to explore too, since you get a sense of how Silent Hill's practically a ghost town. Buildings and interiors are old and dilapidated, with dirt, mold, and chipped wall paint. Meanwhile, outdoor areas have overgrown grass, cracked concrete, and seemingly abandoned houses and shops. And I haven't even talked about the details in the other world. So these are basically the twisted versions of the same areas in the game. They were very iconic in the original Silent Hill games, so it was awesome seeing them remade in Silent Hill 2. Like, if you thought that the normal version of town looked run down, wait till you see the otherworld version of it. The environments look like they could crumble at any time. You also get this rustic, bloody aesthetic, complete with metal doors and chain link fences that look like they've degraded from years of wear and tear. And that's on top of the terrifying imagery. There was just so much detail that you could easily miss out on subtle things like environmental storytelling, and even some references to the other Silent Hill games. It's crazy actually. It's just like how I found new things in the first part of the game during my 3rd time playing it. Heck, I actually thought I saw everything in my first playthrough, but then I noticed even more details the 2nd time around. Bloober Team really did a fantastic job, going above and beyond, and I haven't even talked about the characters yet. Though I honestly didn't like how certain characters looked, at least before I watched the recent trailers and played the actual game. I thought that their animations were stiff, and their faces looked off, and even things like Maria's new clothes looked strange to me. But I realized that it's probably because I got so used to the designs and the art style of the original game. Seeing them firsthand in the remake convinced me, and I ended up loving their new looks. I'd even go as far as to say that seeing some of the mods that replaced Maria's remake outfit with her original one didn't look good to me. But yeah, combine those changes with the brilliant voice acting and motion capture, and I ended up being captivated by each character's presence. Especially since the more iconic cutscenes that were remade from the original were completely enhanced with the technology that we have now. I loved how you could tell a lot of subtle emotions from every character because of their expressions and body language. It added a lot to the characters, specifically James, since you could literally see all the emotions going through his mind, even if he didn't utter a single word. Meanwhile, Maria was incredible in the game. I was staring in awe, especially in the first few cutscenes she was in. It's like her flirtiness and playful nature was turned up to 100, and you could literally see her seductive personality from her eyes alone. Now, the main and side characters aren't just the only ones that got upgraded animations. Silent Hill 2's enemies got some love, along with the combat. Unlike the original game, you won't be sluggishly whacking enemies, stepping back then whacking them again. This time, you can do it in 3rd person. Seriously though, the combat is completely different in the remake. James can beat up enemies with melee weapons like the wooden plank with nails and a steel pipe. He'll also gain access to things like a handgun and shotgun. I actually thought that the combat looked very much like the Resident Evil remakes when I first saw it in the trailers, but having played through it myself, I'd say it's a worse version of it. The enemies can be pretty tanky, so you'll end up whacking them a couple of times while attempting to dodge their attacks. I've always felt like dodging them can be a hit or miss, and don't get me started on shooting them in the head, since they tend to sway a lot. I ended up just using melee weapons on them, occasionally panicking and shooting them when they were way too close to me. Oh, and continuously stomping them when they're down, just to make sure, you know? I think that what the combat's like is understandable though, because Silent Hill 2 is a psychological survival horror game after all. It tries to put a little bit more action in there, but at the end of the day, James is just a regular guy who's trying to get through everything that the cursed town throws at him, though it helps that there are plenty of healing items lying around. Bullets too. You frequently get ammo boxes with 1 or 2 bullets inside, but hey, it adds up. As for the enemies, they're way more dangerous now. The starting enemy in particular, the lying figure, almost got me several times. They would puke out acid that spreads way farther than OG Silent Hill 2, and they would even try to hit you back hard if you try to whack them 2 times in a row. But I'd say that applies to a lot of the enemies in the game. I found myself frantically shooting, dodging, and healing up because they would have unpredictable attack animations. Like the mannequins! Oh god, the mannequins. I don't think I ever got used to the mannequins in the game because they love to hide and blend into random spots. And if you ever lose them, well, you're probably in for a surprise. I really liked the new enemy designs though, especially the nurses. They varied from having bare legs to white or black stockings. I'd say that's a 10 out of 10 design choice. It felt real special seeing the iconic enemies made even more terrifying to deal with, and the boss fights immediately stood out during my playthrough because of how much they've been upgraded. Let's just say that the fights won't go as you think they will. It made for a refreshing and more challenging experience, since my memories of the original fights were still relatively, well, fresh. Especially with the bosses that involved more story with the side characters, since it really raised the stakes. Putting the combat aside, I thought that the puzzles were pretty good. They're similar to the original game, but not exactly the same, so they still felt new. But just like OG Silent Hill 2, they require a lot of backtracking and key finding work. It feels kinda old school, so some people might not like it, but I personally thought it was fun since I like that stuff. What's cool about the remake is that you can choose different difficulty levels for the combat and puzzles, and you can even change the interface preset. This means that you can choose to go retro to hide hints and item icons in the game, which is similar to OG Silent Hill 2. Or go for a modern preset that makes interactions more visible, just like in newer games. But yeah, as amazing as this remake is, I'll have to talk about some issues that I've had with it, starting with the performance. At the time that this video was made, the game still had some performance issues on PC. The frame rate drops quite a bit in some sections, and there's some traversal stuttering as well. I personally had to deal with that, on top of changing my settings, running it with DirectX 11 and even fiddling with my graphics card software. But doing that solved most of my issues, like the game finally stopped crashing. Though since I played the game really early on, I'm expecting patches in the future that would help with performance. As for the game's pacing, I thought it was pretty good in my first playthrough, but I did notice that some parts of the game felt like they dragged on. Like there were times in the apartment and hospital levels where I felt like I should have moved on to the next section already, but I think I got that feeling because I still had the original game fresh in my head, so I didn't mind it that much, since I was experiencing the remake for the first time after all. And the game's supposed to be much longer than the original, being about 16 hours to complete. but I had a feeling that it might become more of an issue if I decided to replay the game, and I was right. I did a second playthrough to get most of the other endings on stream. While it was fun, the padding felt even more obvious the second time around. I managed to get through the early parts of the game, but specific locations like the prison and labyrinth started to really test my patience. Though I guess it made sense since I never really liked those areas in the original game. It's just they're much longer in the remake, and specific puzzles purposely slow down your progress too, so it ended up feeling like a slog for me to play through again. I honestly felt kind of tired by the time I reached the end of my second playthrough. But at least I got to experience some fun endings along with the more sad ones. But despite those issues, I thought that the Silent Hill 2 remake was incredible, and I'd say that it might end up being a classic in the future, even though it's literally a reimagining of a game that's already a classic. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it can replace the original, but it does a lot of things much better. I still think that OG Silent Hill 2 is a special game that can't ever be replaced, and it's always going to be there for both newcomers and fans. It took me over 32 hours overall to complete both my playthroughs. I ended up missing a few items for certain endings though, since it was very easy to progress through the game accidentally, locking you out of backtracking to get them. So unless you're religiously looking at a guide while you play, then you're gonna miss out on a lot of items. I was very satisfied with my experience though. I also didn't want to go through the later parts of the game for the third time in a row, so I was good with just watching them on YouTube. But yeah, I highly recommend Silent Hill 2 Remake, though I'd say that it's best to wait for a sale unless you're really excited about the game, because it is pretty expensive. Plus, I don't know if you'll play on the PS5, but if it's for PC, then maybe there would be more updates and fixes out by then. Let me know what you thought about the video, and like and subscribe if you liked my content. Thank you to my patrons at Patreon for supporting my channel. Alright, this one was a bit longer than my usual review videos, but it's mostly because I wanted to try a different style with it. I mean, it's still mostly the same as my previous videos, it's just more detailed. But yeah, it might take longer to make these if ever. I hope you guys enjoyed it though. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.